Hi, Mind Trippers, and welcome to our third edition of Mindtrip.
Woo! Number 3.
Tonight, the topic is on parenting, how to be a parent and not a friend. And I know the topic was specifically on mothers, but for those papas listening in too, I think we're going to switch the wording from mothers to parents tonight.
Absolutely.
So, big disclaimer before we get started. We have so much good information on parenting tonight, but there's a few things we want to say in regards to that. And please jump in if you need to.
You got it.
Firstly, Taylor and I are not parents. I know I've had children living in my house for years at a time in my 20s and early 30s, but it's not the same as not being a parent.
I was going to say, you've kind of had a little bit more experience as like a step parent and like helping, so I think you have a little bit more to touch base on when it comes to being a parent and offering those skills and techniques that we are going to talk about.
Possibly, but
Possibly.
Like we said, we're not parents, and so we want to make that very, very clear that we're not here to give advice.
Right.
We're not here to tell you all how to parent, because parenting, I can only imagine, is a hard enough job. And in 2020, holy cow, I can't imagine all of you are going through. But what we can speak to is our professional expertise, our psychological background, and the families that show up in our clinic and in our practice. Generally, when things have gone wrong between parents and kids, and there's often delinquent behavior, elopement, runaway behavior, so we can speak to that.
Right.
And so I think just throughout this episode to remind you all that we're not here to judge, we're not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing, and that we know we're not in a place to have the same level of firsthand experience, but we're here to offer the experience that we do have.
Right. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that. We just wanted to share that up front with you guys. Even though we're not parents, we have a combined 20 plus years of experience of doing not only life coaching, but trauma therapy, family therapy, outpatient therapy, where we work with kids and we work directly like one-on-one with parents, and we understand that dynamic. So we do want to get down and dirty with what we've seen to help you guys understand just the different shift that you can have in your own parenting and your own mindsets. So with that being said, Miss Nikki, what do you think is, I'm trying to come up with like a really cool question.
Oh, obviously we plan for these things so far in advance, by the way.
No, we definitely do plan, but I like to come up with these spontaneous questions for Nikki. So Nikki, what is the difference between being a parent and being their friend? Or what can be the benefits or the consequences of trying to do both?
Well, I guess that's the entire episode, huh? I think before we get started, it's super important to define parenting and friendship. So before we delve into all the issues of what can go wrong or why things can go wrong,
right?
First of all, I want to be very clear that from a psychological and behavioral development standpoint, you can be both a parent and a friend. Shocking, I know that's not the title of the episode, right?
Right, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because in the prior episodes that you guys have seen with us, a lot of these mentalities or mindsets are either or. Like our first episode was grief. It's like either you grieve the loss or you move on. You can't do both. But like when it comes to parenting, it's not either or. So go ahead and take it.
Yeah, so in that way though, I think we firstly tonight have to define what being a friend is when you are a parent. And so study after study have shown that parents can be friends to their children, but I equate it to more of an example of a professional friendship, whether it's a mentor, a pastor of a church, a supervisor at work, where you can confide, you can have deep conversations, you can have a mutual trusting and respectful relationship where you listen to each other and you listen to each other's opinions, but you still withhold some information. Right? So I may be able to have a deep conversation about grief and loss and stress to my supervisor, but it's going to be very different than if I'm talking to you and I'm like cursing and I have my hands on my head, it's late at night, and I don't know what I'm going to do, and I'm putting all of those feelings on you. Right? And so I think we can be friends with our children, but it's in that way of knowing those boundaries and those limits, and almost in that professional capacity where if you're going to disclose possibly upsetting or deep information, you have to set that boundary on that.
Definitely, you have to set boundaries. And like you said, depending on what you're confiding in your child, and it can make the difference between like, do they want to sit there and like just talk through things, laugh, have a good time, or is it going to put your child into like a panic mode, like, oh my God, I see my mom struggling, I see my mom suffering, like protective mode, like what can I do, like rolling right into that problem solving mindset, what can I do to help? I want to give an example. Good for the example? I want to give an example. I have a friend who has a spouse, and growing up, his father was not in the picture. He just randomly left, gone, no explanation, no anything. And you know, mom thought that she was confiding in her kids just to let them know what was happening in the household, which it does need to take place, right? You do need to kind of share some things with the kids, what's taking place. But she let them know that she doesn't know where money is going to come from. Where is the next meal going to come from? How are we going to keep this roof over our head? So in her mind, I'm pretty sure as a mom, like you're sharing this with your kids to let them know like, hey, something's going on. But my friend's spouse kind of went into problem solving mode directly and was like, you know what? I got to get out here and make some money in some way. Unfortunately, it was illegal, but you see that burden. He felt like it was his problem now. He felt like he needed to be the man of the house. He needed to bring in the money because mom confided in him in that way.
So I'm so glad you mentioned that example. I may be pronouncing this wrong. So in my hours and hours of dissertation work every week, I am just a Rolodex of random pieces of research information.
And as you guys will find, Nikki is the statistics and research girl, so she's your girl, she knows everything.
So you may or may not find this helpful. So for those of you who do, great. For those who don't, thank you for bearing with me on this. But there was a study done by Horner et al. And what et al means is there were 5 other people in that research team with Horner. But in this study, essentially, they found that in single parent households, parents, and primarily the majority of single parent households in the study were mothers, but there were some fathers in it as well. But parents who confided in intimate details, especially with feelings like with their daughters, so that had more of a strenuous relationship, daughters ended up engaging in more delinquent behavior, giving into peer pressure, having worse emotional regulation, and ended up having more runaway behaviors. Meaning, and examples of this would be when parents were confiding in their child about all of the negative things the other parent had done to them, if they were wondering how they were going to get food on the table. And so I think, like you alluded to, we have to teach our children how to problem solve, and we have to make them aware of the world.
Right.
But there's a difference between saying, hey, I don't have the money for this, let's coupon, or we aren't in that financial position, versus, oh my gosh, late at night, I don't know how to get food on the table.
Right.
Or there's a difference between the living situation is going to look different because your dad and I couldn't work things out, versus this is what terrible person, this is what he did to me, I'm so stressed, look at the position we're put in. Because it really has like negative behavioral outcomes through adolescence.
I think that's difficult sometimes for single parents to discern as well, because if you're a single parent with more than one child, sometimes you look to your child, especially if they're like a teenager, like an older teenager, to confide in them and share like, hey, your dad or your mom has not been helping and I'm feeling a little bit worried. In my therapy experience, I've seen a mom actually ask the child like, hey, I need you to get a job and help support this household. Or taking the opposite end of that, just sharing some experiences and like treating them like a friend, like, oh girl, what are you doing this weekend? I want you to live your best life. Share with me the details. And speaking to the statistics that you just shared about how a mother or a father having that type of relationship with their daughter increasing delinquency rates. I had a family that I worked with about 3 or 4 years ago where I saw that the mom was just always encouraging her daughter to go against the grain. She didn't really need to worry about her education because unfortunately mom wasn't worried about her education. That was how she grew up. And just influencing her to do whatever she wanted to do. Unfortunately, she does now live a life of crime and delinquency that I've followed up on. And I really want to unfortunately say that relates back to how mom had her relationship with her, how mom treated her as a friend and a confidant instead of that parent relationship or that mentor relationship.
So, and with that being said, though, the same is not true if we reverse that role. I'm going to keep my studies to a minimum, 3 or less this episode. So I'm on my second one.
Right.
I will try. So in a study, I can't remember the author's name, But I do remember, and maybe we can link it down below later, you can look into it again. But there was a study of 790 Dutch adolescents studying that parent-child relationship. And what they found was adolescents who felt comfortable confiding in their parents about secrets and things of that nature have, again, lower crime rates, better emotional regulation, more likely to attend college or like a technical career right out of high school. And so the relationship of being open and trusting with, the child to the parent has really positive outcomes. But when the parents are oversharing, it has a really negative effect.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that too, because that's a common theme that I've seen in my years as a therapist. So we just talked about the possible negative implications of oversharing with your child, but let's move on to what you shared about just letting your child speak freely, if you will, like helping guide them. I've seen parents who encourage their child to speak how they feel, like they work together kind of when there's a problem, or they're helping them give guidance. I had one girl who kind of went through a traumatic situation in her, I want to say, early years, but she was able to confide in her mom, like, Mom, this happened, and Mom did everything that she could. And now she's, I want to say she's like 18, 19, and she's in college. She actually enrolled in Shippensburg, my alma mater for my undergrad, just so you guys know. But she's doing well there too. I think it's so important to discern the difference between, like, what am I doing that's going to help my child learn and grow versus what am I doing that's going to hold them back.
And so, like we said at the beginning, you can actually be friends with your children and have positive outcomes. It's just as we have different friendships throughout our life, right? Like, you and I together act and speak differently than what we do when we're in our group of friends together, than what we do with our coworkers, than what we do with our significant others even. And it's not that we're being fake or putting on a facade, it's how you naturally match to your audience, right? We were just talking about that earlier, how like, our personalities are so different in different situations. And so it's the same with your children. You can still be friends with them. It's just that friendship of filtering and boundaries, just like you would in a professional capacity. You can share, be honest, have truly mutual respect and love, but you filter, and the way you speak and the tone and how much you say is there versus a way you and I would chat to each other.
So I'm glad that you said that, because that leads me into this quote that I've heard time and time again, and it's that children are educated by the adults or the caregivers or the parents' behaviors, not by their words and what they speak. So again, last week we did talk about the power of your words and speaking and building each other up, but research shows, now I can be the research person, right?
Yes.
Right? Research shows that we learn through watching and observing other people. So as a parent, if you're modeling those healthy relationships, if you're modeling those healthy boundaries, how to, connect in appropriate ways, your children are going to pick up on that. They're going to be able to understand, like, okay, so when is the right and the wrong time to share things? Who do I need to share this with versus this person? I think that's important.
And that leads too into, like, so why, before we get into the reasons why we tend to fall off the wagon sometimes in this area, for all the other reasons why it's important to have that boundary, right? Because again, it's not black and white. It's not that if, you have to be a completely authoritarian and harsh parent and never be a friend, or it's not always being a friend, right? Again, it's that professional boundary. But I think the other big difference, like you said, children grow up on what they see, not always what they heard. What they hear translates into their self-worth and what they think of themselves, but not how they behave necessarily. There's a little bit of a difference there, which we won't get into. So if you are a parent who tends to overshare or overindulge in those details that are unnecessary or gossip negatively about the other parent, generally and statistically speaking, those children then grow up to overshare with boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever the case may be, tend to overshare with friends or with older adults where it's not appropriate, and they don't know that difference because as an adult, as a child, they heard their adult in their life overshare.
And I feel like that also makes them mimic the same behaviors that they've seen between the relationship between mom and dad, right? Like you just said, maybe oversharing, but if they've seen fighting and arguing in the household all the time, they're gonna feel like that is what a healthy relationship is. That is how I interact with my spouse or with my boyfriend in the future, or when they grow up to be adults.
Which can be really unsafe. So now we know, so we define the healthy way to be a friend, because it shockingly is possible, right? It's a tricky balance.
It is.
But it's possible. And we know we touched base briefly on the negative consequences of what happens when you don't follow that. So I think the important thing of like our episode is why these things occur.
Right. So let's jump down into some of the experiences that some parents may have had growing up. So the number one thing, I'm not sure if you guys have heard about this, but as we're growing up as infants into toddlers, into adolescents, into adulthood, we develop certain attachment styles to our parents or our caregivers. And there's 4 common ones. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about the differences between the 4. But let me go ahead. I wrote this down so I can give you guys all the information, so don't mind me looking away. So the secure attachment style definitely starts early in life. This is where the parent is helping the child develop confidence. They're helping their child feel safe, secure, and as they grow up over their life, they're able to be independent. They're able to learn things on their own. They're able to have healthy relationships with other people outside of their parent relationship. These are the kids who are able to separate from their parents, maybe in daycare. Sorry, don't have kids, so the daycare is not right here, right? But they're able to go to daycare and not cry extensively when mom and dad leaves. They show their independence at that age. What's also very important is that once they reach a certain age as well, they feel comfortable reaching out for support and saying, hey, I need help in this certain area. Hey, I'm struggling with my grades. Mom, dad, what can I do to get back on track? Or, hey, I feel like I'm having stress and anxiety in my life. I need help. And I think that's important in building that relationship up with your child, such as, like you mentioned earlier, being a mentor or like a supervisor type of role with your child. So that one is common, but there's 3 other ones. And we have the anxious, preoccupied attachment style, which is next. This one is kind of where the child is really desperate to form bonds and relationships with people in their lives. And it's kind of like they almost develop this fantasy in their head of what relationships should be. They're emotionally hungry. They're always seeking out that connection, that love from people around them. You might see, this is another version of insecure attachment style. So you might see them like being clingy to people, clingy to friends, being preoccupied when they leave them, or even that possessiveness. Like, you're mine, you need to stay with me, because they haven't had that connection with their parents growing up. Another big takeaway is the kids growing up with that anxious, preoccupied attachment style, they rarely, I don't want to say never, they rarely feel safe and secure.
So you can think about that either in terms of your own kids or how you were growing up, because we were talking about why, as parents, you tend to slip into being overly friendly and not being able to find that healthy balance. And so if you do not have a secure attachment style, and you had any of the insecure, or we'll call it negative attachment styles, less healthy attachment styles, it's probably going to show up in how you parent your own kids now.
Right. So that leads me into the last 2. So the next one is the dismissive avoidant. It's a mouthful. Dismissive avoidant style. And that's where the child just is emotionally distant. They push themselves away from people. They don't want to attach to them. And there's probably some themes of fear of being let down, or some issues with abandonment. They just would rather not. And so they develop this sense of pseudo independence. Like, they feel like they're able to go out there and be independent, but they really can't. And some of the kids that I've seen in doing both therapy and coaching is that these kids are parentified. They weren't able to develop a secure attachment with their parents in childhood, and they just weren't, like, they felt themselves having to take over and be the parent.
And oftentimes too, this happens when, so we talked about earlier, when parents overindulge the details of the distressing conversations. So oftentimes the result of that conversation over and over, your mom or dad did this to me and they're not a good person. How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to do this? Where it's not filtered, puts children, whether intended to or not, in their brain, in a parentified situation. So they grow up feeling that less secure attachment style. And although the noble intent, like, of course, no parent means to do that, that's oftentimes the result of those kinds of conversations.
And the last one and the biggest attachment style that I've seen, especially in doing research on attachment styles of delinquent females and in therapy is the fearful avoidant. The fearful avoidant attachment style. These kids, it is what it says. They fear developing attachment to other people in their lives because they may leave them. They don't know like if they can trust that individual. There's an extreme lack of trust, and they really avoid feelings altogether. Like they've probably learned that sharing their feelings equals, or they've been shut down equals like don't do it. Like just don't even share your
painful
feelings.
Or vulnerable.
Right, for sure. And they often run away from their feelings. I see too. So these are the kids, or even if you had this attachment style in your childhood years as an adult, these are people that put up that wall automatically. Like those people that you're like, I know something's going on with her, but she just has this wall. Like I can't get through to it. It's likely that they have the fearful attachment style there. Some other things that I really wanted to point out with this attachment style is just feeling like when you are in a relationship with somebody who may have the secure attachment style, you feel trapped. It's like, whoa, I feel trapped. Like, what is this person doing? They're treating me with respect. I'm not used to this. But when their partner is distant from them, they feel like, oh my God, like clingy, like over the top, like what can I do to make this better? It's kind of like there is no happy medium.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot now with the question. Are you willing to share what kind of attachment style you think you had in childhood and how that has shown up, I guess in your current relationship, since we don't have kids yet, how it shows up at least with your husband, and then we can probably ascertain how that would end up with you as a parent.
So I'm on the spot. I don't know if you guys can see like this beautiful chandelier above my head, but there it is. Honestly, I feel like I grew up with a secure attachment style. My parents were married for 10 years. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you guys are watching this, but they met and married within 17 days. Crazy story. But they were able to kind of show and model what love looked like, at least for the first 10 years of my life before they unfortunately got divorced. But I learned how to be independent. I learned how to look to other people for guidance and support. And I learned how to like speak up when I needed something instead of hiding my feelings. Also, you pointed out in research earlier that when you provide that type of relationship with your child, you're more likely to succeed in your career, go to college, live a happy and fulfilled life. And I truthfully and thankfully, I have all of that. So I believe that I grew up with an attachment that was pretty secure.
So then how do you think that will affect how you parent?
In my opinion, I believe that my husband also grew up with a secure attachment style. He has a huge family. I don't even know where to begin. He has like 100 cousins. Seriously, I'm not lying. Like everywhere we go, Nikki's like, how do you know that person?
She's not lying.
That's Tommy's cousin, or his uncle or his aunt, whatever. But that support for him growing up allowed him to have that secure attachment style as well. So when you have two people that grew up kind of in a secure attachment style, you have that basis for how to parent your child. You have that basis for how to encourage them, how to teach the difference between punishment and discipline. So I think we would be on the right track with that.
And I also see, like, even in your relationship, right? When you guys have disagreements or fight, it's like a super, I always laugh, like, I think I've mentioned this before, they have the best couple fights. It's hilarious. Because it's not hurtful. It's not even serious. Like, even when they are annoyed, it doesn't go past the level of annoyance, and you can hear that in the fighting. Because they'll couple fight like on FaceTime in front of me, and I'm just like, this is great. Like, I get my popcorn out. But the point is that you can fight healthily knowing that there's no abandonment issues.
Correct.
There's no insecurity. There's no jealousy. Like,
Correct.
It's a mutual, healthy communication style. And so even, I know this episode's about parenting, but even when it comes to relationships, right, we talk about why we do what we do, and attachment styles will permeate through all kinds of different relationships in your life, including, significant others and as how you parent.
And I do want to share with everyone here, if you identified with one of those 4 attachment styles are not set in stone, like they're not concrete. These attachment styles are malleable, meaning that you can change depending on the different types of relationship that you're in your life. Of course, as with anything, it's going to take some work. But if you're experiencing like the anxious, preoccupied style, or even the fearful style, or the avoidant, dismissive style, and you enter into a relationship with somebody who is secure, over time you will learn those secure characteristics as well. You'll be able to adopt them and change that, and change your mindset with how you can be in relationships. And that, if you have children, that's going to trickle down into that as well.
Absolutely.
So
So we talked about how your attachment styles may affect how you parent. Another thing in not being able to have, let's say, the healthiest, because I don't want to say unhealthy because that sounds negative, and I think as parents, everyone does the best they can. And so with what you have, like everyone does the best, all of us in any way, we do the best we can with the information we're given. So again, in maybe ways that are not walking that professional friendship and maybe leading more into a confidant or less healthy forms of friendship, guilt. The guilt mindset is one that we find time and time again will have a parent cross over from parenting to more of that friendship lifestyle. And guilt can come from, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I do want to speak to that guilt and kind of tying in some of the attachment styles that we just talked about. Unfortunately, when we grow up, many people grow up experiencing different types of trauma, and this can kind of influence the different types of attachment styles that you have. But when you become a parent, sometimes you are reliving or recreating that, and it creates that guilt. So when you're trying to raise your child, you kind of feel like, man, I don't want to discipline them. Like I don't want to, recreate that physical abuse that may have happened to me. I feel guilty, so I'm going to go over the top and compensate in some other way.
So actually, yeah, let's talk about that, because I also think that's like undoing your past, which is tied into guilt, and it's different. So no, you're fine. So let's lead into that. She's playing footsie with me under the table. So in undoing your past too, like you said, you're either going to model your childhood or try to do the complete opposite.
Yeah.
So for example, if you grew up in a household with lots of fighting and physical abuse, the healthy version of that would be not to yell at your kids, but also be able to set boundaries and have a little bit of healthy conflict and know that it's okay. But oftentimes when you're trying so hard to undo that past that was painful, whether it's physical, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, all of the above, right? We kind of tend to oscillate too far in the opposite direction, and what it turns into is never having a healthy relationship with rejection or love, because you necessarily didn't have that healthy relationship growing up. So you do everything you can to make sure your child is like you're the favorite parent, and they always tell you they love you, and they can never tell you they're mad at you or they hate you. And if they don't want to be around you, it's like you said, that clinginess of wanting, like the more cuddles they give, or let's say you go to drop them off at daycare and they come running back to you day after day, it almost makes you feel good because you're like, oh, my child loves me so much, even though that's not the healthiest thing for the child. So oftentimes as adults, we try to undo our own traumatic experiences so much that it ends up creating a child's own traumatic experiences, and we don't even realize it because that's obviously not generally anyone's intention.
I want to say that's a common theme, and you have probably experienced this too in doing family therapy, that many of the parents that we encounter say, Taylor or Nikki, I want to give my kids everything that I never had.
That goes into the guilt. Yep.
Right? I grew up in like a home where I didn't know where our next meal was going to be, or like my dad was abusive to my mom, or I wasn't able to have these opportunities. I just want to give my kid a brand new lease on life, like something that I never had. And that's a common theme that goes into these attachment styles that we just talked about. It makes parents kind of feel a little bit guilty. So when they start doing some of the things that they swore they would never do, like that their parents did to them, they feel guilty. Like spanking. I know that's a highly controversial topic, but some parents feel guilty when they need to discipline their child.
Or even like you had talked about, and again, like we're not saying you should or shouldn't do anything. These are just simply examples that we've heard from our clients, and we're not going to take one side or the other. Like you said, even that guilt of, let's say you grew up, you feel guilty because your child's grew up in a single parent household, or like you said, you want to give them everything that you never had. I think all parents want to give their kids a better life than what you had. But then the problem arises when you're not able to set boundaries or say no, because it's like give. I want to give you all the toys and everything, versus I want you to have a better life and I still set healthy boundaries. And that's where where that clear difference starts to really show up, especially in early adolescence and adolescence, and then later adulthood.
I want to jump back to something that I'm not sure if she mentioned it or I mentioned it, to be honest, but there's a saying that if your children have never said, I hate you, you're the worst parent there is, I don't want to live here anymore, that you haven't really parented. What do you think, I'm putting you on the spot now, what do you think about that? And how do you think that ties into feelings of guilt or attachment style, things like that?
So I think, obviously not all children are going to say that, depending on how you're raised, or like sometimes hate is considered a curse word in a house. So I think that phrase goes more to the ideology of that if your kids are never mad at you and displaying that anger in some way, then obviously we're probably being overindulgent, right? Just like in a relationship too, if your partner's never mad at you, like it shouldn't happen often, or doesn't mean that they have to say they hate you, but if your partner's never mad at you, like, are you just giving into all of their wills and not setting healthy boundaries for yourself? And I think it's the same with parents. When your kids say, I hate you, or I'm mad at you, or you're not my favorite parent, or like whatever wording that translates to, that's a pretty common reaction for most kids to say when they're angry, and their parents set boundaries. So that if you don't hear that, I guess my thought would be, I'm concerned, are you able to set boundaries, or are you being overly indulgent?
I love that you said that. I remember, I'm going to just throw myself under the bus. I remember growing up, I don't know what I did. Oh, I remember. Okay, so my best friend at the time, her mom would buy her anything she wanted. Mom, take me shopping. Sure. Shoes, clothes, purses, the amount didn't matter. So because I was hanging out with her so much, I expected my mom to do the same exact thing. And guess what? My mom was like, pump the brakes. Like, I have 3 other kids. I'm sorry, me and two of my brothers. I can't just spend $300 on you every weekend at the mall. And I told my mom that I hated her. And I still feel bad about that to this day, because I know my mom did everything that she could to help me. But like, when I said that I hated her, I had to like sit back and think, like, do I really hate my mom? Has she done anything to really make me mean that, to resent her? And the answer to that was no. And I had to apologize and be open with that. And of course, she had that conversation with me saying, and it was that open line of communication. I know you don't hate me, Taylor, but when you say things like that, it truly hits me here. It really hurts me, because like when you say that to me, it just makes me feel like I'm not doing a good job. And you, as a parent with your child, you have to have that open line of communication there.
That leads me to 2 thoughts. I'm so glad you shared that story. That conversation that Mom had with you.
My mom doesn't have Facebook or anything, but yeah,
Mom's name is Elaine.
Elaine.
Okay. So the conversation that Elaine had with you, it was explaining, like, hey, like it wasn't punishment. Like when you said you hated her, she didn't punish you for saying that. She's like, hey, this is how I feel when you make me do that. We're gonna have a conversation. So that would be the healthy form of having a hard conversation. Whereas the unhealthy version of that we talked about earlier would be, oh my gosh, why do you hate me? What did I get up to? I'm so sorry, I can't give you everything you want. So there's a difference in that.
The guilt could have came in with, oh my God, you hate me? Okay, fine, whatever. I don't care about like these bills that I have coming up. I'll take you to the mall right now.
Or even apologizing to you. I'm sorry.
Over apologizing, yeah.
Over apologizing. So I think that leads into the mindset shift of, like even hearing the topic of this week's segment of like be their mother and not their friend. It almost puts it in a black and white mindset. And so I want us to be clear that, it's not black or white. We don't have to just be a parent or just be a friend, right? We talked about the healthy boundary. And so I think too often we forget that discipline means to teach and not to punish, right? What's the definition of a disciple? Whether it's a disciple of God or anything else, a disciple is a student, not a recipient of harsh punishment. And so when you think about your children as disciples, they're students. And so teaching the way to set boundaries, teaching the way to be like communicative, teaching about feelings, and not either being overly harsh or being overly indulgent and being their best friend.
I'm going to follow up with that. Multiple research studies. I feel like I'm taking over on your research now. Like, you bring that out of me. You bring out the astute part of Taylor. But multiple research studies do show that when you set boundaries, rules, guidelines, expectations within the home, your child needs that. They flourish with that. So they might say that they hate you or they hate it here, but when you set those rules and guidelines and boundaries with open communication and you allow your child to express themselves and develop that sense of independence, that is the melting pot that's going to create a child with a secure attachment style.
So, some self-disclosure, since you self-disclosed earlier, that doesn't mean, again, that if you haven't necessarily raised your kids that way this far, or they've displayed some delinquent or low behavior, or maybe not yet, that doesn't mean they're going to, or that like, you need to throw in the towel. So this is interesting because I feel like I have more of the insecure. I grew up with an insecure attachment style, but you said earlier, I think last week when we were having this conversation, you saw something different in me. So what would you say my attachment style is?
I would say your attachment style might be anxious, preoccupied.
Okay. So regardless of whether it's insecure, anxious, and preoccupied, because we both have arguments on this, it's not necessarily the healthiest version, right? And that's the situation which I grew up. So as a result of that, right, I, on paper, by all means, a successful human being, PhD, owning my own business, had steady jobs, bought my house by myself in my mid-20s, like, by all intents and purposes, like a solid human being. But that said, that whether it's insecure or, what did you say?
The avoidance, or I'm sorry, the anxious, preoccupied.
The anxious, yes. That does show up in relationships. So it didn't ruin my life. I can promise you in my 20s, and I'm only barely into my mid-30s at that. So probably most of my adult life.
I think that she says mid-30s, because not even, but anyway.
Regardless, I would say probably most of my adult relationships that has showed up. And so even now, when I'm in a super healthy relationship with someone who has a secure attachment style, it has completely changed the way I react to things. It's changed my outlook, but once in a great while, I still have to call Taylor and be like, should I be upset about this, or is this normal? And knowing all the research and the data I have, it's still like that childhood trauma creeping in.
Right.
And Taylor has to be like, no, I'd be a little agitated, like, no, Nikki, this is a Nikki issue. This is not a relationship issue. This is like your issue. So it's not that your kids' lives are going to be ruined. It's just that it makes their lives harder. Because I know many times I've overreacted or felt betrayed or abandoned in situations that weren't necessarily accurate.
Right. So I want to ask Nikki another question. We'll put her on the spot. Since you've identified yourself, well, since I've identified you with the anxious, preoccupied attachment style, and you just shared a little bit about yourself, and we did make a disclaimer that we don't have kids, but Miss Nikki over here has kind of been a stepmom. So how did that show up in the kids that you helped raise during those specific times in your life? Like, how did you feel that came out when you interacted with the kids?
Honestly, I feel like in more recent years it didn't show up because I've had that education and I've grown as an adult. Probably in my 20s, when I was in that situation where I had kids living in my home and I was helping to raise them, that showed up more as if they didn't like something I said. Like I'm a person of structure. I'm all about teaching and academics. That even if we're cooking together, it's like this ingredient means this. Like that's my lifestyle.
That is so Nikki. Like, hold your thought for a second, because this girl absolutely loves to teach, and like that's what her life is about. Like, I'll come over here and just want to have friendship. She's like, Taylor, let me teach you about this thing I just learned. I'm like, okay, yep. She wants to teach and she wants to learn, and there's so many times like she would send me cute little videos teaching her old stepson about teaching him Greek, Spanish, English. It was just so cool, and she loves to teach.
But that said, I think sometimes you have to let kids be free. And so when I would get a little bit of that pushback of like, I don't want to do this, now it's like, okay, that's fine, go do your thing. But I think when I was younger, I got any kind of negative attitude, it hurt my feelings. So it wouldn't necessarily affected my behavior because I checked myself quickly, but I took everything super personally. And I could see myself if I wasn't in this career field and I didn't understand triggers, I could see how that would easily slip into overcorrecting. Like, oh, I'm sorry, what do you want to do? Instead of just being like, okay, that's fine, and ignoring it. So I don't know if it necessarily showed up, but it's something that I had to be extra cognizant of until I got more comfortable in my own skin through life experiences.
And that goes to show the statement that I said earlier, that attachment styles are malleable. So you said that, she's a little bit anxious, but like through life and through experiences and through education, all these other things, like you're able to show and develop that secure attachment style that comes out in the kids that you not only helped raise, but even in the kids that you do therapy with. I think that's an important takeaway for all of you parents out there who may have listened to this and say, I identify with doing that, or maybe I have been more of a friend than a parent or the opposite end of that. Again, it's not black or white. It's not either or. You don't have to get it right the first time. This is a journey.
Mm-hmm. And two, maybe not even looking at yourself. This is can even be beneficial for those of you who are wanting to have kids soon.
Right.
Right. But taking a look at yourself of, okay, I don't identify with that as a parent, but I identify with that when I was growing up. Are there feelings of guilt? What was your relationship with your parents?
Right.
Was it healthy? Do you find yourself, feeling a certain kind of way about things that aren't necessarily healthy,
right.
but like you identify with that? So whether it's something you project onto your kids or
right.
something that you just carry with you, I think the first thing is identifying all those risk factors, because we all have them. We just have them at varying degrees and different amounts.
Right.
So it's identifying that and then knowing to take the next steps to being proactive and stopping that. You and I you had a secure attachment style, and I was fortunate enough, like I said, to have years of education experience to kind of help correct that path for me. But had I not, I think I would not have been able to show up as well as I did, or with the kids that I have in my life.
Right. So guys, I want you that are watching to please drop some comments below if you have any questions for us regarding your parenting styles, or if you need some advice or some tips on how to discern the difference between, do I need to parent during this situation, or can I be more of their friend? Please share that with us below. We'd love to, have that conversation with you right now. If you're not feeling like you want to put yourself on the spot, like Nikki puts me on the spot, you can connect with us on all forms of social media. On Facebook that you see here, I'm sure he's going to put everything down there, which it looks like it's there. The BK LLC 19 is on Instagram. And then on Facebook, it's the Bryant and Katsaounis Life Coaching. You guys can send us a message and we'll connect with you that way.
Yeah. And again, I think this is probably one of those topics that takes a minute to have that self-reflection, because it's the one I think we get most defensive about. Like you said, even in my role as a step parent, which is nothing compared to the importance of a parent. Like I was just a third party in the background. Like I know how seriously I took that role, so I can't imagine what it's like when it's your own child. So I think it's a topic that we probably need to sit on and reflect on. But to know that tearing down that wall of defensiveness or vulnerability or just opening up understanding, it's not right or wrong.
Right.
It's just learning a different way to look at things can really be beneficial.
And again, guys, not to beat the nail on the head, or I'm not good with saying. Actually, yes, I am, but that one I'm not. You're doing a good job. You're doing the best with what you have raising your kids. You're going to make some mistakes, which is okay. It's a learning and it's a growth opportunity. Please reach out to us if you need any assistance or any guidelines or tips, and we will definitely be here to help you grow through that and provide you with some serious mindset shifts around parenting, or even around, some of the trauma that you may have been through yourself that caused you to develop the other 3 attachment styles that we discussed during the show.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, as always, thank you for watching Mindtrip as we explored the connections between mindsets and mental health. Check us out next Wednesday at 4:30 right here. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.